You know, I think one of the big challenges of being a teenager is trying to work out an answer to this question. How much can I get away with? Because you know there's all sorts of rules that you've got to follow, and if you're smart, if you're on the ball, you're working out a way to get around those rules, to sort of look like you're obeying them, but you get away with absolute hell if you can. Let's think about when you get a substitute teacher. Now, you know, these hard-working, long-serving people, and your teacher's sick, so they call a substitute teacher in. They don't know anything about you. They don't know anything about your class. They don't know anything about the subject you're learning. And you, come on, you put them through hell, don't you? You test the very limits of their discipline. You will try and get away with anything you possibly can. Had a friend of mine was saying they had a substitute teacher, and how do we put this politely? He had sort of a very high forehead, a little like myself. He had this sort of big, bald head. And what they noticed was, during class, that the sun was coming in the window, and with their wristwatches, they could actually direct just a little bit of heat on this guy's head that he was totally unaware of. And so the entire class, this poor substitute teacher is sort of just trying to get something off his head, and unaware the whole class is ganging up against him, because you're always trying to work out, what can I get away with? Had a guy at another school, he's a friend of mine, it was an all-boys school, and there was this teacher, he might have been a reasonable teacher, I guess, but his command of the English language wasn't brilliant. And he had a rather heavy accent, which was kind of unfortunate, because you know when you're doing an exam or something and the time is up and the teacher says something like, put your pens down, when this guy spoke, he said it a little bit like this. Remembering it's an all-boys school, he said, gentlemen, pull your pants down. You can imagine what the reaction was. Because if there's a rule, you try and get away with it. Now, there's a school not too far from us here, which a large number of you attend. And it's always interesting to see how you try and get around the rules. Like, I heard at this school that in winter there's a jumper you can wear as part of your uniform, but you've got to wear the blazer over the jumper. You understand this sort of rule? But I have heard that when the students, these law-abiding, respectful students, ready to honour their teachers at any moment, when they get on the bus to go home from school and there's no teachers around, I have heard, can you believe this? The blazers come off. You see, you try and get around the rule. The very same school, this was a boy around about year 11, there are regulations at this school for the fellas as to how long their hair is allowed to be. Like not over the eyes, not over the ears, not over the collar, you know the deal. And apparently this young student at this school, his hair was just a tad long. And so a helpful teacher decided to draw the school rules to this student's attention and implied that he ought to get his hair cut, that afternoon. Now, he was just trying to get around the rules. So he says, but I thought this was a Christian school. And the teacher said, well, of course it is. He says, well, Jesus had long hair. You see, you just try and get away with as much as you can. I have heard, now, there are some very evil people at this school. Because when your tie is done up, that top button's got to be done up. Yeah? And if your top button is not done up under your tie, I have heard that some students actually rip the top button off so that they can get around that particular uniform rule. Does it make sense? All of us, if there's a rule there, you see, what can I get away with? How far can I go? And that question is always asked when anyone talks about boy-girl relationships. question is, well, how far can I go? I know I'm not meant to do anything disobedient. I know we're not meant to be fooling around sexually, but how far can we go? Now, can I tell you the problem with the question? I understand the question, but the problem with it is you're saying, how close can I get to sinning without technically sinning? The question says, how do I enjoy this sin without actually doing the sin? And the question's saying, I want to disobey you, Jesus, but I just want to get as close as possible without getting caught out on a technicality. And when you think about it that way, that's not genuine obedience, is it? Saying to God, I want to get as close as I can and enjoy the fun of disobedience without getting caught out on the technicality. That, to me, sounds more like genuine disobedience. And I don't know whether you've ever thought to yourself, oh, I wish I'd get rid of all those rules in the Bible, all those commands that start with, thou shalt not. And you think, surely we could who needs 10 commandments? What about if we just picked our favourite 7 and we sort of stuck to them? Or what if we made them not the 10 commandments, but the 10 suggestions? Surely, come on, God loves us, God forgives us. There's got to be a way of getting rid of some of those rules from God. And you know what? The people of Jesus' time thought exactly the same thing. Because when Jesus came talking about God's love, when Jesus came and talked to them about God's forgiveness, how God has mercy and he loves sinners and welcomes them back, there was a whole stack of people who were secretly hoping that Jesus was going to get rid of those commandments in the Bible. We're working our way through Jesus' teaching in the Sermon on the Mount. We're looking at how to be genuine disciples. And tonight I want to look with you at being genuinely obedient. So, if you've got your Bibles there, this is the big time to get them out. We are in Matthew chapter 5. And I want to see what Jesus says in answer to the people who are saying, surely, Jesus, you can get rid of some of these commands. Surely you can just water them down a little bit. You got Matthew 5, we're in verse 17. Just cop what Jesus says here. Matthew 5:17. He says, don't think that I've come to abolish the law or the prophets. I haven't come to abolish them, but to fulfill them. I tell you the truth, until heaven and earth disappear, not the smallest letter, not the least stroke of a pen will by any means disappear from the law until everything's accomplished. Anyone who breaks one of the least of these commandments and teaches others to do the same will be called least in the kingdom of heaven. But whoever practices and teaches these commands will be called great in the kingdom of heaven. For I tell you that unless your righteousness surpasses that of the Pharisees and the teachers of the law, you will certainly not enter the kingdom of heaven. And you can imagine the people hearing that thinking, oh my goodness, Jesus is not just going to get rid of it, he's actually going to lift it to a whole new level. And Jesus is about to show us a whole new level of obedience. Jesus wants to get rid of the question, what can I get away with forever? Jesus wants to demolish the attitude of, how far can I go? Jesus wants to show you a way of obeying God that will revolutionize the way you live as a disciple. Jesus wants you to be on a team that loves to obey God and rejoices every time you do it. We're learning how to be genuine disciples. Tonight we're looking at genuine obedience. Now let me show you how we always treat any rule. Our whole world operates on this system. Let me show you, here's the way it goes. We like to look at rules this way because it tells us how to obey, but it also tells us how to get around them. Here we go. It's something like this. Here is our way of obeying rules. It's like there's a fence. There's like a big fence there and a gate, and that fence is the rule. It tells us there's a line you're not meant to cross. There's a gate there, and the law says, don't go through this gate. Now, whenever we look at any law in our land, that's the way we look at it. And we work out that anything that passes through that gate must be wrong. But that also means anything that leads up to it has to be okay. Our whole legal system works on this principle. And people who are employed as lawyers study for years to work out exactly where the fence is, exactly how the gate opens, so that people know when they've broken the law and they know when they haven't. I'll show you how it works with road rules. Right, let's give an example. Here's our way of obeying road rules. The rule now is the fence says speed limit 60. That's the rule. And you think, well, what does that mean? It means anything which goes past that rule has to be wrong. So if you're doing 70, 65, or even 61, technically you've broken the law. But it also means that anything that leads up to it has to be okay. So if you're doing 50 or 55 or 59 or even 60, you know you haven't broken the law. Now, that's the way it works, isn't it? And there's nothing wrong with that. Our whole legal system is founded on that principle. Here's the problem. When we think that God's rules operate the same as our human rules. Jesus now is going to show us a new way of obeying. And here's how we like to obey God's rules. Matthew 5:21. This is what Jesus says. He says, "You have heard that it was said to the people long ago, 'Do not murder, and anyone who murders will be subject to judgment.'" Now that sounds pretty straightforward, doesn't it? This is the example Jesus gives. The fence, the gate, is now called murder. Do not cross that line. Whatever you do not end somebody else's life. It is clearly against God's commands. And so we sort of work out from our perspective that anything that goes past that gate must be wrong. But then we work out, well, anything that leads up to it has to be okay. So if you're torturing someone, hurting them, abusing, yelling, that's okay, as long as you don't actually end their life. You haven't broken the commandment. Now, are you starting to see a problem with the way we look at God's laws? Jesus wants to show us a whole new way of obeying God. Look at what he says, verse 21 again. He says, "You have heard that it was said to the people long ago, 'Do not murder, and anyone who murders will be subject to judgment.' But I tell you that anyone who is angry with his brother will be subject to judgment. Again, anyone who says to his brother, 'You idiot,' is answerable to the Sanhedrin. Anyone who says, 'You fool,' will be in danger of the fire of hell." Now, let's just see what Jesus is saying there. This is the law against murder. Here's what he's saying. If murder is wrong in God's eyes, we know that anything that goes past that gate is wrong. You take another person's life, you've committed murder. But Jesus says, if going up to that fence is wrong, don't even take the first step that puts you on the path that would lead you there. Don't yell at someone. Don't abuse them. Don't humiliate them. Don't torture them, because that's a pathway which only takes you in one direction. And Jesus says even treating someone like an idiot or a fool is taking a step in exactly the same direction with the same attitude that ends thousands of paces away with murder. In fact, Jesus says, if murdering someone is wrong, go even further. Have a look at verse 23. He says, "Therefore, if you're offering your gift at the altar, and there you remember that your brother has something against you, leave your gift there in front of the altar. First go and be reconciled to your brother, then come and offer your gift." I wonder right now, have you got a Christian brother or sister? Maybe somebody here. And there's been a disagreement. Maybe one has hurt the other. Maybe they've hurt you. Maybe you've hurt them. And you've never fixed it up. But rather than plotting revenge, rather than thinking of them as an idiot, rather than wounding them with paying them out and insulting them, Jesus is saying, fix it up with them. Restore the relationship. because you're on the path that actually leads to murder. You might have a physical brother or sister in your own family, and you know there's been a problem between you, and you've never fixed it up. And Jesus is saying, hey, don't get on the path. Fix the relationship. Are you getting an idea of how revolutionary God wants your obedience to be? Because think of somebody now who's done the wrong thing against you. Right? Someone who's been in the wrong and they have hurt you. Jesus is saying, not only will you not murder them, not only will you not hurt them or abuse them or insult them or pay them out, not only will you not call them names and treat them like an idiot, you will go further. You will go to them and you'll restore the relationship. You'll forgive them from your heart, and you will do whatever it takes for the two of you to be friends again. And the reason that you'll do that, that's how God treats you. That's how Jesus treats you. God sent his son Jesus to die on a cross so that you could be forgiven and the relationship restored. He didn't wait for you to get your act together. Jesus died for you even while you were sinning against him. Are you seeing there is a whole new way of obeying God that doesn't just stick to the letter of the law, but goes way beyond it? And if something's wrong, if there's the fence and you know that's a sin, Jesus is saying, don't even take the first step that leads you to the path that takes you closer to it. Let's look at another example. Verse 27. You have heard it was said, do not commit adultery. Okay, let's have a look at our way of interpreting that rule. Right? The sin, the offence, it's now called adultery. Having a sexual relationship with someone that you're not married to. And we look at that and we think, okay, we understand that. Anything which goes past that gate has to be wrong. If you're involved sexually with someone right now and you're not married to them, God's command is clear. That lies way outside his acceptable behaviour. But here's where we start bringing our human thinking in. We think, okay, if everything past the gate is wrong, then surely everything that leads up to it must be okay. A little bit of undressing together, a little bit of fondling, a little bit of stimulating, a little bit of groping, a little bit of pornography, a little bit of looking lustfully. Therefore, we ask the question, how far can I go? How far can I go down that path and not actually go through the gate of that fence? Would you like to see what Jesus does with that command? He shows us a whole new way to honour him with our sexuality. Look again at verse 27. You have heard that it was said, do not commit adultery. Watch this. But I tell you that anyone who looks at a woman lustfully has already committed adultery with her in his heart. Let's have a look at God's way that we can really obey him. He's saying if adultery is wrong, that's the fence, that's the sin. Then obviously everything that goes past that fence must be wrong. But Jesus says if having a sexual relationship with someone you're not married to is wrong, then don't even start on the path that might lead you there. Don't get into undressing with each other or fondling or looking or imagining or even lustfully wanting somebody else and playing around with it in your mind. Because he said that's taking you on a path which only leads in one direction, and it leads towards sin. I can remember many years ago, Castle Hill High, I had a year 10 scripture class. And we were doing some good stuff, and there were some guys in the class who wanted to find out more about becoming a Christian. So I said, why don't we meet at lunchtime for 5 weeks, and we'll do a thing called Discovering Jesus. And just over 5 weeks, 5 lunchtimes, we'll find out from the Bible what it means to become a Christian. And praise God, these 5 guys all made a decision to follow Jesus. So here I am at Caso, 1 week after they've decided to become Christians. And one of them, his name's Ben, and this was a long time ago, There's no one that goes to our youth group now. This guy, little Ben, says, hey Tim, you know how he became a Christian last week? I said, yeah, that was awesome. He said, look, one of my friends told me something and I just need to check if it's true or not. I said, okay, fire away. He said, my friend told me that now I'd given my life to Jesus, I had to stop sleeping with girls. Is that right? And I said, oh, did I forget to mention that last week? Sorry. He said, fair dinkum. I said, yeah, God has got something powerful in mind for your sexuality. He has a marriage partner that he wants you to be special for, and he wants you to wait and keep your sexuality for marriage. He said, you never told me that. I said, sorry. So I looked at him. I said, Ben, do you still want to be a Christian? He thought about it for a moment. He said, if I've got to give up sleeping with girls to follow Jesus, I'm prepared to do it. I said, good on you, Ben. And then he just sort of said as an aside, he said, I guess I'll just have to content myself with dreaming about it all day. And I said, Ben, can I show you a verse in the Bible? That's the verse I took him to. If you look at someone, the word here is lustfully. It means you want to own them and possess them in a wrong way. That you're sexually imagining stuff with them that you're just not going to carry out, but your mind is playing it out. He looked at that verse. He said, you mean to honour Jesus, I can't even dream about it all day? And I said, no, God has got far better things in mind for you. Now, press the pause button. Some of you are sitting there and thinking, you've got to be joking. You mean we came along to this youth group to hear this stuff tonight? And you'd be thinking, Tim, you don't understand. Come on, Tim, you're an old geezer. You're 53. What would an old fellow like you know about sexuality? Can I put a proposition to you? I just want you to see whether this could possibly be true. Are you ready? Is it possible that your parents know more about sexuality than you do? Is it possible? What do you reckon? Come on, where? How do you think you were conceived and born? Gee. Man, and if you've come along to Crossfire tonight and left your parents alone at home, what do you think they're doing? Come on! Just because someone's older doesn't mean they don't understand about the problems of sexuality. I want to let you know, I understand what you guys go through. I know what it's like to be tempted sexually. And I understand that as a teenager, I know what it's like that you feel trapped in an almost adult body where you're absolutely controlled by an extremist army of feral hormones which have gone ballistic as they race and throb through every extremity of your body and try to convince you that you are a helpless prisoner, that you're a prisoner of war in a battle where sexuality has conquered you and you've got to give in to its every demand. And I'm sure there's times where you feel that you will explode if you don't release your sexual tension. I've got some good news for you tonight. Do you realise that in history, nobody has ever died because they exploded because they didn't release their sexual tension? It's never happened. The police, when they've been called to investigate a sudden dead body, they have never written down in their report, the victim spontaneously exploded because they didn't release their sexual tension. Does that make sense? It's never happened. Your body might scream at you and say, you've got to give in to those sexual urges. But do you know what God says? 1 John 4:4 says the Spirit who is in you is greater than the spirit that's in the world. You don't have to give in. James 4:7, the Bible says, resist the devil and what? He will flee from you. You don't believe that, do you? Seriously, you do not believe that. Resist the devil and he'll flee. You believe that if you resist the devil, he'll just tempt you harder and more difficult, and eventually he'll force you to give in. That's what you believe, isn't it? Because if you really believed that he would flee from you, you would resist temptation. But he's conned you into thinking that it's useless to resist. You've got to ask the question, who are you going to believe? Will you believe what the devil says? Will you believe what your hormones are saying? Will you believe what the God who has placed his mighty Spirit within you says? God understands what it is like. That's why his forgiveness means so much. That whatever you've been doing, whatever you're involved in, when you bring it to him and turn away from what you're doing, there is free and full forgiveness for every and any sin. In fact, God cares so much about you that he wants to say, don't do anything which will head you down the path of sexual disobedience. Look at verse 29 and see how extreme his language is. He says, if your eye causes you to sin, gouge it out and throw it away. It is better for you to lose one part of your body than for your whole body to be thrown into hell. And if your right hand causes you to sin, cut it off and throw it away. It is better for you to lose one part of your body than for your whole body to go into hell. Now, just before you all race out looking for the kitchen knives, let me just warn you here. Jesus does not mean that physically, literally, you're meant to hack off any part of your body that has ever caused you to sin. Because if we did that, most of us would have not very many appendages left on our body at all. He obviously doesn't mean you to do that. But here's what he means. He's saying, do anything it takes to deal with the temptation that is dragging you down. If you're looking at something or looking at someone that is causing a temptation for you, Jesus is saying, look away and don't look back. If there's a website that you keep ending up at and you know you shouldn't, Jesus is saying, flush that out of the system, get rid of it from your favourites bar. Do not go there, and tell someone else so they can ask you how you're going at avoiding it. He's saying if there's a magazines or a DVD that is bringing you down, burn them, get rid of them. If there's something happening with your boyfriend or your girlfriend and you know it doesn't honour Jesus, he's saying separate the relationship and deal with it. Do not go down that path. Can you see there is a whole new level of obedience that Jesus wants from us? He's calling us to have a revolutionary obedience, and he has placed his Spirit in you that you might be able to honour him in your obedience. Now, can you see there's two ways of responding to this? You can either obey God reluctantly and try and get away with as much as you possibly can. Try and get as close to sinning as you can. That's not genuine obedience. Or you can obey God joyfully, knowing he wants the best for you, knowing that his way is right, knowing that obeying him will bring you a satisfaction you could never have any other way. That is genuine obedience, and that's the obedience that Jesus is calling you to. Now, as you go through Matthew's Gospel, there's stacks of other examples of how you apply that same principle to a whole string of commands. Only touch on them briefly here. You can look these up in your own time. Look down in verse 31. He talks about divorce. Now he's not having a shot at someone who's got divorced. Divorce probably exists within every family group somewhere, and you know that sometimes it is the only way forward. But what was happening back in Jesus' time, men were treating their wives horribly. Men were not honouring their wives. If a man had a disagreement with his wife, under Jewish law, all he had to say was, I divorce you, I divorce you, I divorce you. If he said it 3 times, they were divorced. And a divorced woman then could not go and earn money. She had no way of surviving. And Jesus is saying, look, no one ever wants divorce. No one gets married thinking, let's get divorced soon. What he's simply saying is the fact that the Bible allows it to happen is a reluctant concession that sometimes there's no other way forward. But he's just saying it's not the first option, it is the last resort. He wants to change the way we look at his rules. Here's a second one in verse 33. Meaning what you say. You know what people of Jesus' day were doing? They were saying, I swear to God that this is true. And they thought, now if I swear to God it's true, then I better make sure it's true. But if I don't swear to God, I don't have to keep my word. And Jesus saying, verse 37, let your yes be yes and your no be no. A disciple's word should be trusted. Don't look for loopholes to try and get out of being a person of your word. Verse 38, getting even. Verse 38, you have heard that it was said, an eye for an eye and a tooth for a tooth. Now that actually was one of God's Old Testament commands. But the people of Jesus' day were enforcing it. So, if you got into a bit of a barney with your neighbour and he accidentally knocked one of your teeth out, you'd have to go and actually knock the exact same tooth out of his. And it was crazy. And Jesus is saying, you don't understand. That rule, which, by the way, is one of God's commands in the Old Testament, was to limit revenge. Because what would happen way back in the Old Testament days, someone would come over and steal one of your sheep. So you get all your brothers and cousins and you go and burn their house down. And so they get the whole clan and they come and kill you. And can you see it was just escalating? And God said, no. If there's been damage done, let's have equal recompense. If someone has damaged one of your teeth, limit the recompense to one of their teeth. If someone's stolen one of your sheep, then all you're entitled to is you get one of their sheep to replace it. And by the way, our legal system still runs on that today. He says, but God's plan in giving us that rule was to limit revenge. Jesus says, this is what God had in mind. You don't even have to pay back. You can be wronged by someone and you don't even have to seek the revenge. Look at verse 39. Someone strikes you on the right cheek, turn to him the other one also. Someone wants to sue you and take your tunic, give him your cloak as well. Someone forces you to go 1 mile, go with him 2 miles. He's saying if you've got an enemy, don't plot to work out how to get them back. Work out how to bless them outrageously. In fact, dealing with your enemies, verse 43. Because people are saying, love your friends, hate your enemies. He's saying, no, God never said that. Verse 46. If you love those who love you, what's the deal? Aren't even the tax collectors doing that? And if you only greet your brothers, what are you doing more than others? Don't even the pagans do that? Do you only hang out with the kids who hang out with you? Do you only invite people to your parties and invite you to their parties? Jesus says even the pagans do that. Even the non-Christians who have no hope without Jesus, even they show that sort of love. You are a disciple. You are called to a bigger form of love. You're called to genuine obedience. That's the standard that Jesus has for us. Genuine obedience. There's 2 ways of looking at obedience, but only one of them is what God's after. You can obey God reluctantly, or you can obey God joyfully. You can obey God because you have to, or you can obey God because you want to. You can try and see how close you can get to sinning without actually, doing it. Or you can determine if God has actually set out there's a sin there, you're not even going to get on the path that might take you close. You can say to God, well, God, I guess I have to obey you, but I wish I didn't have to keep your stupid commands. Or you can say to God, Dad, what do you want me to do today? One is genuine disobedience. Only one of them is genuine obedience. So here's the question. Where do you need to obey God today? Just think about your life. Where are you trying to get around God's commands? Where are you trying to get as close as you can to the sin without actually sinning? Where are you in danger of defying God's standard right now? Because that stuff you're trying to get away with, it's like walking along the edge of a cliff. You're thinking, there's the sin, that's the cliff. I'm not going anywhere near it. I'm just going to see how close I can get to the edge of the cliff without falling. You know, when you're walking on the edge of a cliff, there's actually the danger that you might go over. But you say to me, obeying God is hard. It's hard work. I want to say, yes, obeying God can be hard, but it's great. Imagine you're in a sporting team, a footy team or something like that. You've been going the whole season, you've been training your guts out at training nights, you've been flogging yourself on the field, you're putting your life on the line, you're busting yourself for the team and you're putting in the greatest effort you could possibly do. You get to the grand final, it's the toughest match you've ever done, it's a hard slog and you get all the way to full time and you finally win the grand final. And this is your moment of victory and you are exhausted. Every bit of energy you got is just gone. All you want to do is collapse in a heap somewhere and not wake up for days. Your body is saying, I can't do any more. But you've just won a grand final and there's this huge shield that your team is going to be presented with. It's got a little shield on it for every team that's won it over all the years. And it takes 4 of you to lift it off the ground. And there's a stadium around you with your fans and supporters and you're feeling exhausted, but it's the victory lap. What do? You sit down and say, I'm too tired. We're not going to carry this stupid shield around. Who cares about the fan? No! You have just got your moment of triumph. You have just won a victory that you fought for, and even though your body is on the point of collapse, you lift up that heavy shield. You run around on your victory lap. You're there for the fans and spectators who are applauding you. Your body wants to collapse, but you are on your victory lap. As a Christian, right now, you are on your victory lap. Jesus has won the battle. He has defeated Satan. When he died on that cross, when he rose from the grave, sin was smashed, death was smashed, your guilt was smashed. Jesus has won the victory and now we run with him on his victory lap. He gives us the victory for us to enjoy. And we do it by obeying him. Now, let's just imagine you've won that grand final. And that night, your team and all the supporters are celebrating in a victory party. But let's imagine, rather than staying with the victory party, let's imagine you go down the road to where the losers are gathering. And you actually join in their party and you spend the night bagging out your own team. That is crazy. But maybe as a Christian, you're doing that. Jesus has got his winning side here. But you're hanging out with the people that don't honour Jesus. And you're making fun of the people who do. And you never get to join in the real victory. Jesus is calling you to genuine obedience. He's got a whole new way for you to obey God in every area of your life. He's won the victory and he's asked you to join with him on his victory lap. And he's calling you away from the edge of the cliff because he desperately doesn't want you to fall. Tonight, Jesus is calling you to genuine obedience. When he calls you, will you come?